So far in this series, we've been examining the position of the head relative to the torso. The common advice is to pull your head back to fight the idea of forward head posture. But we've also seen that that tends to rotate the ribcage back at the top and forward at the bottom, ultimately making the thoracolumbar fascia slack. Last episode, I asked what pulling the head back will do to the airway. Let's take a look at the airway so we know what we're talking about. In this image, we are looking at a bisection of the nose, mouth, and throat. We see there is an entrance to the airway here through the nose, and another one here through the mouth. The two entrances join at the pharynx, which is the passage that leads to the two tubes that go down the throat. The larynx is in front and it leads to the trachea. That's the tube you breathe through. Behind is the esophagus, which is where the food you eat goes down to your stomach. We'll dig into this area of the body much more deeply in the future. For now, we just need to know that there are two quite crucial tubes passing through the neck. What might not be obvious is that both of these tubes go somewhat towards the back of the body. The esophagus is pretty close to the spine, and the trachea connects to the lungs at the hilum, which is closer to the back of the lung. That means if we trace from the organs back towards the nose and mouth, that these tubes will follow a forward and upward trajectory. When you pull your head back and bend the upper end of the spine back, the top end of the airway will also be pulled back. That essentially creates a kink in your airway. The tube, which is going forward and up, is bent back. So let's remember we have the larynx at the front, the esophagus just behind it, and above them there is a passage called the pharynx. When you pull your head back, you are bending and narrowing the pharynx, which will restrict your airway. Breathing problems are inevitable, and problems with swallowing can also occur. Many people these days are very interested in deep breathing and breathing exercises. Clearly, people perceive that they are not breathing as well as they could. But do breathing exercises ever address this basic mechanical problem in the airway? In my view, it's quite foolish to try to fix your breathing patterns without addressing the fact that you are narrowing your airway by how you maintain your ribcage and head. This is another reminder of how important the geometry of your bones and bony structures is. You can do all kinds of work to train your diaphragm muscle or to puff up your chest to take deep breaths, and all the while never confront the fact that you are partially closing your throat by pulling your skull back. The conventional view of the cervical spine is really quite odd. They believe that the head should be back relative to the front of the body, and therefore they must believe that the spine curves back at the top. To them, a straight cervical spine is a problem, one that is remedied by bending the head further back. Let's look at an X-ray of a straight cervical spine. Jando Masawero has annotated this X-ray of someone with a straight cervical spine, and we see that still the pharynx is bent back and restricted. So while the conventional opinion here would be that the head is too far forward, an examination of the airway reveals that it's not forward enough. Masawero has also annotated this X-ray of a person with more of a curve to their cervical spine, and we see again a backward bend and squeezing of the larynx and pharynx. It's quite curious what is put forward as positive change by the conventional model. Does it really seem like the neck should bend back on itself like this? Does that seem like something that will open or close the throat? Now let's look at Masawero's model. First though, let's remind ourselves of what's happening to the spine just below the neck. As the ribs get smaller, the distance between the front of the ribcage and the spine gets smaller, and so we have this rounding of the upper back. The conventional model says that this rounded portion should angle back. Masawero and Alexander's model says that this rounded portion should point up, with the front of the ribcage being vertical and the back being vertical below the armpit. However you want to slice it, the portion of the spine at the top of the ribcage is sloping forward. The conventional model says that the spine should bend back on itself. Masawero's model says that the spine should continue to slope forward so that the head can sit forward and up relative to the torso. This picture of FM Alexander, annotated by Masawero, shows roughly what that looks like. We have more images of Alexander here as well as pictures of his students that show how they kept their head forward of their back line. This is obviously quite different from the conventional wisdom that says the back of your head should line up with your back. We see that Alexander and his students maintained this relative position of the head even when bending or going into a deep squat. You may not be aware that this is actually uncommon. If you look at average or even quite athletic people squatting, you will see they pull their head back behind their back line. That is a massive shortening of the neck and upper back, and of course, it's no good for your airway. What Alexander shows in this picture with his flat back, forward head, and the fact that the angle of his torso is actually quite small, around 20 degrees, is really something that is quite remarkable. You will find that most people, even quite athletic people, couldn't do this. They can squat, but they cannot keep their head forward and keep their back flat and prevent themselves from massively angling their torso. When your head is forward and up like this, your airway can follow a straight path from the lungs to the mouth and nose. Massaro has made this diagram showing the difference. In the posture Massaro recommends, you see that the neck goes forward and up, meaning the airway doesn't have to bend back on itself like in the standard model. The airway can go forward and up all the way to the mouth and nose. I'd like you to observe yourself and the people around you. Where do you see the back of the head in relation to the back? And in those that you see the head forward, what shape is their back? Bent or straight? Do a little observing, then join me next episode, and we'll put the forward head posture concept behind us and find out where the road forward begins.